What's up, everybody? Welcome on back. Another episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. It's episode 19. We're approaching number 20. That's like definitely a record. I'm frankly shocked that I haven't checked out on it. My attention is kind of like that sometimes. But it is I, Bloody Bill Vox, once again back for another episode. If you've been catching up with all the episodes last week, we had two in 1 week because I couldn't get it together with recording these things so far in advance. So I figured, all right, we'll change the airing day to Wednesday. So it's Wednesday, 6 a.m., bright and early. Spotify, YouTube, bada bing, bada boom. Last week we had 2 episodes. We covered SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain, and WrestleMania 20. Those are both available for consumption over on YouTube and Spotify. You can listen on Spotify or you can watch on YouTube. And honestly, I mean, I like all the platforms, but YouTube's really the place to be because you get the game footage. And yes, I could do a video podcast over on Spotify. I have learned that I could do that video Spotify deal, but I like the distinction. You know, sometimes somebody might want to put it on in the car. Other times they might want to, put it on in the living room. Who knows? I don't assume where anybody is listening or watching. So, we cover all of our bases. But on this week's episode, we're going to go ahead and talk about WCW versus nWo World Tour. And if by some chance, as you see the intro starting on your screen, if by some chance you're saying, hey, what about the current events? Let's know a bonus episode in the same feed for Dropkicks and Joysticks, The Week in Wrestling. We record it live on Twitch, and then I just turn it into an audio file. That's the extent of it. But we do handle it like a live broadcast, a live recording, so if you want to be a part of that, typically it will be done Saturdays, 10 a.m. Eastern, twitch.tv/BloodyBillVox. But now, here on this program, we just jump right into the game. In fact, it's already on the screen. WCW versus nWo World Tour for the Nintendo 64. Released on November 30th, 1997. It only came out on the Nintendo 64. It was the first WCW title to be produced on the Nintendo 64 by THQ. We all know about THQ. They've made a lot of great games in wrestling history. They're responsible for many of the greats. And in my opinion, WCW versus nWo World Tour is the baseline, at least here in the United States. There's a lot of Japanese counterparts. Virtual Pro Wrestling comes to mind. There's Japanese counterparts to these games, but in terms of here in the United States, WCW versus nWo World Tour is the foundation for Revenge, for WrestleMania 2000, for No Mercy. Without World Tour, those other games don't exist in my book, the way that I see it. And I always see a lot of people ranking the 4 games, and No Mercy typically takes the cake as being the greatest of all time. And I don't disagree that it's a great game, but what I do kind of take umbrage with a little bit is I don't rank them. They're basically the same game. I pause for dramatic effect because some people might be like, excuse me, what? They're the same game? Okay. Well, allow me to explain before we get into the features and everything. Because I'm just kind of flying all over the place. These games all play the same. The controls are all the same. If you put in World Tour and you put in No Mercy, if you know the World Tour controls, you know the No Mercy controls. Yes, each game has new features, new modes, added rosters. The WWF titles expanded into, Steel Cage and Blood and all that good stuff. But WCW versus the World is where it all started, and each game was kind of just, it was that game expanded. And it's crazy to think where the WCW titles could have gone on the Nintendo 64 had the license stayed with THQ versus what happened, we talked about it last week, where EA came in with a big-time offer, and THQ wasn't willing to match it, and WCW went with EA for the licensing. THQ went to WWF, and the rest is history. I don't think it's any secret that the EA games sucked. Mayhem's not terrible. I've still not played Backstage Assault. I've actually put it on the schedule for the show at some point in the very near future to force me to play it, because I've never heard a good word about it. Never. I've never heard a good word. Excuse me. I got to take that back. I did recently. Somebody said, hey, we got to give the game its credit. We got Vince Russo's Iron Man theme off of it. But if I recall from my days in the theme music community, it was like a 15-second cut. It wasn't even anything special. So, yeah. But anyway, WCW versus nWo World Tour is where it all begins. So I don't play the ranking game because they're all the same. To me, anyway. All the same to me, anyway. But let's get into the features and the notes. You know, there's not a ton going on, but there is a ton going on at the exact same time. You know, it may not look like a lot in list form, but, you know, you got singles matches, tag team matches, league battles, 5-on-5 WCW versus nWo. You've got tournaments, round robin, the league challenges, which is broken out into like 6 different promotions. Do I have those promotions written down? Kind of, sort of, not really. Kind of, sort of, not really. Yeah, look at me. I always cover most of my bases, and then I forget a crucial part. But let's get into the game preview, courtesy of our friends at SmackDown Hotel. So here we go. WCW vs. nWo World Tour is a wrestling video game released in 1997 for the Nintendo 64 game console. Released at the peak of World Championship Wrestling's dominance in the Monday Night Wars, World Tour was THQ's first foray into the N64 wrestling scene and is a semi-sequel to the lesser-known WCW vs. the World for the PlayStation. It is the second best-selling wrestling game for the Nintendo 64 console. Its sequel, WCW nWo Revenge, would build upon the engine tremendously by introducing ring entrances, improved graphics, more arenas, more signature moves, actual WCW championships, attire modification, and other improvements. 43 players are playable in this game. Who will win this battle royal? Blah, blah, blah. There's some other junk there, basically trying to get you excited about it. I guess I'll read it. Who will win this battle royal? The legendary WCW or the upstart New World Order? Up to 4 players can choose their favorite superstar wrestler in a down and dirty rumble match. As we noted, over 40 wrestlers included, 5 different gameplay modes, tag team, and simultaneous 4-player action are the game features. So let's run through the roster real fast. Representing WCW, we've got Lex Luger, Sting, The Giant, the Steiner Brothers, Ric Flair, Ultimo Dragon, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr., Chris Benoit, Steven Regal, and Diamond Dallas Page is a hidden character that gets unlocked in the League Challenge. Then representing the nWo, we've got Hollywood Hulk Hogan, nWo Sting, Buff Bagwell, Eric Bischoff, Scott Norton. I was supposed to say Scott Steiner, but he's on the WCW side at this point. Scott Norton, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Six, and the Macho Man Randy Savage is the hidden character that you can unlock in that League Challenge. Then we start getting into our kind of phony promotions where a lot of the characters kind of look like characters, but maybe they don't have the rights to those characters, so they're not really in the game, but they're kind of in the game. We've got the Dead or Alive promotion. In here we've got Hannibal, Sumo Joe, Kimchi, Blackheart, Pukteka. That's not the name, but that's what it looks like to me. Puchtecca, Pukteka, Saladin, Dim Sum, Powder Keg, Alibaba, and then you can unlock Wrath. Hell yeah, the old Atom Bomb. The Independent Union promotion features the Black Ninja, Shaolin, the Unknown, the Claw, Black Belt, Paco Loco, Shaman, Master Fuji, and Glacier is a hidden character. And then we've got the Whole World Wrestling League Challenge. There's no characters representing that promotion, but if you defeat the male side, you can unlock Joe Bruiser, which is a very clear homage to Muhammad Ali. And then the Black Widow, who I don't think is an homage to anybody. I'm not sure. Maybe there's some notes here about it. But that's there we go. Let's file another one under the things I didn't think of when I was making my notes. Yeah, I should have taken better notes, I guess. That would have been fantastic, but I did no such thing. I didn't take that kind of note on who Black Widow is supposed to be a note on. So if you know who that is, go ahead and drop it in the comments, or maybe I'll try to find it here as we record. But that's the roster. Joe Bruiser is a mean motherfucker. Let me tell you. I remember playing the modes for the first time back in the day and having such a brutal time trying to get him originally. Like now, I've played the game so many times that he's pretty easy to go after. And as I've looked it up here while I was talking, Black Widow is a caricature of Manami Toyota. So there we go. Wonder if this also will give me who everybody else is. That would be great. It does not. That's all right. I thought maybe it might give me everybody, but it doesn't give me everybody. It just gives me the two, Joe Bruiser and Black Widow. But so those are who those caricatures are. And then a few others, notably here in the notes, we've got Hayabusa, who is renamed Hannibal. Onita is the Puketeka guy. Taka Michinoku is Black Belt, and Abdul the Butcher is Saladin. It says the character description for that is a former Afghan Secret Service operative who refused orders to assassinate Michael Gorbachev. All right. That's an interesting backstory. I didn't even know those characters had backstories. Saladin wouldn't kill Gorbachev. That's interesting. But a little bit more on the game itself. Again, courtesy of our friends. Actually, no, this comes from the wiki fandom page for the game. SmackDown Hotel was actually kind of lacking for information this time around. So everything from here on out that I cite for information, other than the WCW results, which was just a general Google search for the Starcade results, everything else comes from the wiki page. But yeah, a little bit more in the game here. We've got World Tour introduced AKI's critically acclaimed grappling system, one of the best ever in my opinion. That's not written there, but that's just my opinion, in which all moves are started by holds. Choosing to either tap or hold the A button will subsequently produce either a weak or strong results. Wait, what the? They like oofed that sentence a little bit. Let's try this again. World Tour introduced AKI's critically acclaimed grappling system, in which all moves are started by holds. Choosing to either tap or hold the A button will subsequently produce either a weak or strong result once the move is performed, while a similar system is used for strikes. They just pluralized result when they should have used a single. Wrestlers can also perform their signature taunts to help elevate their spirit gauge and perform a special front and rear finishing move when their gauge peaks. In addition to tag team, single, handicap, and battle royal, match modes not seen in future releases include a WCW vs. nWo tournament, round-robin tournament, and league tournaments more familiar to Japanese wrestling. Unlike today's wrestling games, World Tour features no create a wrestler mode, story mode, or ring entrances, and has a limited amount of actual WCW wrestlers. It also makes no reference to championship belts, and upon the completion of a tournament, shows an illustration of a fist raising a gold trophy. A championship belt creation feature was touted prior to the game's release, but it was ultimately scrapped. That's something I didn't know. I didn't know that create a championship was on the table for this, but they scrapped it. Interesting. Anyway, carrying on with the notes. Other features were apparently carried over from the style of the game's Japanese counterpart. This includes the enabling of bleeding, despite the practice being forbidden on WCW television due to its more family-friendly presentation. Foreign objects can be retrieved from the audience and used outside the rings. Weapons include a steel chair, half a wooden folding table, a black baseball bat, and a barbed wire baseball bat, the latter not being characteristic of WCW programming, but rather Japanese hardcore wrestling. In addition to WCW and nWo leagues, as Osmic, Ace, and THQ included fictional wrestling promotions Dead or Alive Wrestling, a reference to FMW, and Independent Union, a reference to the International Wrestling Grand Prix, or the IWGP. These factions consist of several fictional characters who are actually Japanese wrestlers that appeared in that country's version of the game, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. They appear in the American version with names changed due to copyright laws. As we noted a few moments ago, these wrestlers include Hayabusa being renamed Hannibal, Atsushi Onita being renamed to Puketeka. I don't think that's how we say it, but that's what I'm going with. As well as featured WWF stars Taka Michinoku, who goes by the name Black Belt, and then Abdul the Butcher as Saladin. I always loved the games as a kid because I wasn't really familiar with Japanese wrestling, but I knew some of these characters. And as the years went on, it would be like, oh, who's that guy look like? Who's this guy look like? Like the Black Ninja in this game, for example, under the Independent Union. He reminds me of the great Sasuke. One of my favorite players to use in the game actually is Black Ninja. And if you're watching on the screen, you're seeing Black Belt in action in the WWW, the Whole World Wrestling Super Cruiserweight League Challenge. Fun little story about the gameplay that you're seeing on the screen before we jump into reception for the game, the ratings from the critics and all of that. So it's Monday night as I record this episode. It drops Wednesday mornings at 6 a.m. But Saturday, some sort of like work bug just jumped into my system, and I did almost every piece of work that I had to do for the week. And it gets to be about, 1 o'clock in the morning. And it's daylight savings too. So I know that I'm gaining an hour. I don't understand how we do that. As a sidebar discussion, I don't understand how it can be 2:59 a.m. and I'm waiting for 3 a.m. to hit, and then all of a sudden it's 2 a.m. I've never understood it. And it can be explained to me forwards, backwards, upside down, inside out, doesn't really matter. I will never understand the concept of that because it's such a mind trip. It's like, where did my last 59 minutes go, man? But I digress. Anyway, so I was like, hey, why don't I just, because I already had the Nintendo 64 out here at the desk because of the Twitch streams. So I was like, all right, let's record the video in advance. You know, I might end up with way more than I need based on the modes I play, but you know what? I should be able to have a nice mix, even if I got to do a partial of one of the league challenges and post the full thing on YouTube. I was like, let's go, let's do this. So the first thing that I did is I recorded the intro. You know, nice. I think it's like 49 seconds from the boot up to the end of the intro. Awesome, cool, neat. Then I was like, okay, let's go in and I'll do the WCW versus nWo battle. I was like, you know, that's 5-on-5. That ought to take a hot minute. And, you know, I left the difficulty. I always talk about how when you see the gameplay, if I have to play it, it's on easy. This time I left it on default settings. So it was probably on normal or hard, whatever the default settings are. But I pretty much housed everybody with Eddie Guerrero. I will even admit, because you're not seeing it here, and it's just going to get posted on YouTube in a little bit. I threw the match against Kevin Nash as Eddie Guerrero. I was trying to prolong how long it takes, and it only ends up taking about 30 minutes. And I was like, I know me. I'll talk for more than 30 minutes. I need something a little bit deeper than 30 minutes. So I go into the league challenges. And I've done pretty much all the singles ones. I haven't done any of the tag ones in my most recent owning of this game. I've completed them all in the past, but I haven't done any of the tag team ones, especially because there's no unlockables with them. Like, yeah, it's nice to have the little belt above the thing to indicate that you beat it and you won the title, but the tag team one didn't have any unlockables. It was all in the singles tournaments. So, I did all those, the league challenges. But anyway, I see that I haven't done the super cruiserweight. So I was like, great, this is going to be perfect. I'll do the super cruiserweight league, and I will use that as the gameplay footage. We'll post it afterwards. It's going to be fantastic. Now, mind you, it's closer to 2 a.m. now as I'm making this start. Like, it was around 1 a.m. when I started doing the league challenge, or the 5-on-5 WCW nWo battle. And even after throwing a match to try and prolong it, I still ended up beating the next two nWo guys with Lex Luger. I'm spoiling the gameplay footage, but that's okay. So I was like, all right, we'll do this cruiserweight challenge. But it's during this super cruiserweight challenge here, I pick Rey Mysterio. I start noticing my eyes are getting very, very heavy. Now I'm sitting in low light in the office because it's late and I'd had a headache. And so I'm sitting in low light. I'm chilling. I'm just relaxing. And I notice my eyes are getting heavy. Heavy, 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 heavy. So I'm playing this game and I'm fading. I'm fading fast and I'm fading hard. Like, my head is doing the dipping thing. I'm sitting there playing and my eyelids are getting very heavy and I'm just trying to keep myself focused on a screen because it was actually feeding on two different screens. So I could have looked in two different directions to focus on what I was doing. And before I know it, I'm fading out completely. I wake up. I'm still in the match, but it's getting to be too late. And I forget who put me away. It might have even been Eddie Guerrero. I still have the footage. I could go back and review it. But either way, I got like 3 or 4 matches in before I fell right asleep. Completely fell asleep in my chair. I wake up. I try to salvage it. There's no salvaging it. Rey Mysterio is eliminated. And then it flashes me this son of a bitch. Well, we're back, and I left a little gaff in there because I thought it'd be good for the storytelling purposes. So, what happened there before that son of a bitch is I happened to be looking down at my podcast recorder at the exact same moment that I was getting ready to say that it flashed me a screen saying Rey Mysterio is no longer able to compete for the Cruiserweight Championship in the game. Right as I was getting ready to say that, the podcast recorder flashes me a write error. So I had to go back and see what sort of write error we're talking about. So I listened to various parts of the first 24 minutes of this episode, and the parts that I listened into seemed to be okay. So I'm not sure what happened. I'm now recording this second half on 2 different sources. So no matter what happens, we've got 2 different recordings going on. And hopefully everything turns out okay. But if this episode is scrapbook style, you officially know why it is scrapbook style. But let's get back into the story I was telling. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And we started that Rey Mysterio. We lost. So I was like, oh, man, that really ruins what I was doing for my added gameplay here. Like, what am I going to do now, right? So I get up. It's pretty cold outside, so I go outside and I stand in the cold, kind of walk around, wake my senses up a little bit, and I said, okay, we're going to come back. We're going to do this. We're going to get it done. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Everything's fine. In retrospect, I should have just gone to sleep. But when I watched this league challenge back, the league challenge that is on your screen in some form, whether it's the full or maybe it's partially cut, after match 4, there are various points where I fall asleep again. I'm doing the nodding thing. I'm straight up full on falling asleep. And the computer would beat the crap out of me as if I was having a hard time reversing moves, except I'm not moving for anything. I'm like a wrestling buddy. But when I wake up, oh, they wish that they had put me down. So everything from match 4 forward, and I don't have my timestamps in front of me, I don't think. Yeah, I threw those sticky notes away already. I think it's something like 13 matches or something crazy like that. Each and every time I woke up in the middle of it, they be wishing that they had put me down, let me tell you. So as you're watching this and you see times where Black Ninja is getting the hell kicked out of him, 9 times out of 10 I'm sleeping. Because at that point, the Rey Mysterio challenge ran me about 25 minutes, so I probably started the World Tour mode at 2:30 in the morning, or the league challenge at about 2:30 in the morning. Then daylight savings happens, so 2:59 becomes 2 a.m., so I actually technically finished this at 2:30. That's a weird sentence to say. I started this at 2:30 in the morning and technically finished it at 2:30 in the morning. Because without daylight savings, it would have been 3:30 in the morning. It took me about an hour. The longest gaps that I fell asleep weren't even in the gameplay. It would be after the match is over. And you don't see that in the edited version, but you see a little bit of the camera spinning around with the victories, right? Sometimes I would just fall asleep and that thing would just go on an endless loop until I would wake up and move it on to the next one. So a lot of post-match spins are lost to the ages. In terms of they're left on the editing room floor. But I thought it was a fun story to share that a lot of this league challenge that I complete with, what's his face here? Black Ninja. I was forgetting his name for a second. The majority of these matches, it's after match 4 is when it really starts happening. I'm falling asleep in virtually every single one of these matches, and it just amuses me because it's so on brand. And I think anybody who is a gamer of any kind and in their mid to late 30s at least, even at some points your early 30s, but at least your mid 30s, I think a lot of folks could relate to the fact that sometimes you sit down to play a game and you're all jazzed to sit down and play it, and you sit down to play that game and you just zonk right out. I remember when I got the PlayStation 4. It was one of my favorite pass-out stories for a video game. So I got the PlayStation 4, day 1 release, midnight style. No, I didn't get it midnight style. They didn't do a midnight release for it. I picked it up after work. But this is at a time where people were getting jumped for their consoles. People were buying them and smashing them in front of people in lines. It was a weird time to buy a new console. So I remember I went to the GameStop and I grabbed my PS4 and my two launch titles. I think it was NBA 2K14 and Battlefield 1 or something. I don't know. Some Battlefield game. Looked like it was going to be fun. Spoiler alert, I'd never even really played it. But anyway, I tried the PlayStation 4 on, and I'm trying to get everything set up, and I'm making sure that we don't have the overheating issue or the HDMI port issue that some folks were having, because I remember with the Xbox One, that one was just straight up gargling on discs, and then the PlayStation 4 was overheating, or it was coming with a damaged HDMI port. It was like, awesome, everybody's got problems right out of the gate. Good times. So I'm getting this PlayStation set up, and of course, we're in the era of video games where nothing is ready out of the box anymore. And I'm sitting in this like mushroom shaped chair. It's I think it's actually called a mushroom chair because of the shape. And I basically fell asleep in a reverse U. Like, my head was tilted so far back that my neck hurt for days afterwards. But it's a very common thing for me in video games. I remember I was streaming at one point in time just the gameplay of the Jordan Challenge in NBA 2K23, last year's game. A friend of the Twitch show and just a general friend in general, Zane, he was there for it. And one game in particular, I had an 8-point lead. And then I fell asleep stupid hard. And I woke up and I was down by like 11. We got it back to within like 7. Made a nice comeback, but ultimately still lost. But it was 5-second violation after 5-second violation after 5-second violation. It was crazy. So very much on brand for me to fall asleep when I play my video games. And so I just, I probably could have presented that gameplay footage and you would just thought I sucked in those moments, or that I was distracted, or that I was doing something else. And I figured for the sake of a few laughs and a few people who know me, that listen, they'd be like, ha, that's so on brand for you. You passed out playing the game. Awesome. It was a real case of just overdoing it, I had recorded all of the Challenge 64 content. I got up at 6 a.m. We started the Twitch show at 7:30. Live podcast recording, concluded around 11, brought my lady across town to something, got back home around 1 o'clock, watched Crown Jewel, worked while I was watching Crown Jewel, recording footage, taking notes, doing research for the various pieces of content. After Crown Jewel is over, I go back onto Twitch again for a second show to just review Crown Jewel so I can include it in that bonus podcast, The Week in Wrestling. And then once that's all done, I settle into editing everything that I recorded earlier. So in this case, at least it made sense why I was passing out playing the game. Because I had done a ton. I had done a ton all day long. I had just driven myself into the ground. And so, like I said, I could have presented the footage, and I don't think any of you would have been any the wiser. But, like I said, I thought some people listening would get a real kick out of knowing that I'm asleep during some of the footage. And if you want to, fun little thing for the YouTube side, in the comments, feel free to timestamp where you think I'm sleeping. Because I can tell you based on what's going on whether I'm sleeping. There were a couple of times where I was snacking on something, and it's a weird thing that I've always done as a gamer. If I'm playing just by myself, and I've got a snack and I don't want to pause the game, I will let myself take a beating in like, if it was wrestling, take some attacks. If it's fighting, take some attacks. Like in baseball games, I would let a guy get struck out looking so I could take a bite of a sandwich. So there are some moments there where I'm actually eating, but the majority, I'm sleeping. You probably stand a very good chance of being correct if you say sleeping with a timestamp. But feel free to do that in the comments if you want to, poke a little fun at your favorite neighborhood local podcasting, wrestling, gaming weirdo. Wow, I just combined all sorts of things all into one. I apologize if my voice has sounded hoarse at various times. I've been having some hoarse issues with my vocal cords a little bit, and I don't really do a lot of talking. That's the funny thing. I do the podcast, I do a Twitch stream. I don't do any commentary like I used to, and my day job requires zero speaking. So I'm kind of wondering where any of this vocal cord issue could be coming from. Maybe it's change of season. I don't know. But anyway, let's get back. While all of that was very much related, the sleeping stories and all that was very much related to the game, let's get back into specifically talking about the game, namely the ratings. This game got rated very well, and I think it got rated very fairly. IGN gave it a save. IGN gave it a 7.5 out of 10. Nintendo Power gave it a 7.9 out of 10. And our angry friends at GameSpot gave it a 5.7. I figured them being happy about games couldn't last forever after that one rating we got from them that was favorable for, I believe it was one of the last two episodes. Either Here Comes the Pain or it was WrestleMania 2000, where they were actually happy about a wrestling game. But they're typically always the lowest score. When I go to do my research for these episodes, they are always the lowest score. So that's why they're my happy friends over at GameSpot. But further going into the reception from our good pals over at the Wiki fan page, wiki.fandom. If you put in, I don't have the exact link here, but I'll make sure to include it in the comments, or in the description. But if you look up WCW versus World Tour Wiki fandom, you'll find the exact page. But again, I'll make sure that it ends up in the comments. So you can Google it now if you want, or you can just look in the description. Totally up to you. We'll leave it up to the listener's discretion on that one. But in addition to the ratings, here's what the fandom page had to say about things. WCW versus nWo World Tour proved to be one of THQ's biggest hits and was awarded the title of Fighting Game of the Year by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. It gained Player's Choice status with over 1 million copies sold, and its 1998 re-release was instrumental in THQ's 59% revenue increase in the year's third quarter. World Tour eventually sold 1.3 million copies in the US, making it the second best-selling wrestling game for the Nintendo 64 and ranking it amongst the console's all-time best-selling titles. Now, I want to pause there for a second, because there was a specific note that stood out to me that supports previous things that I have found. It says that the 1998 re-release, which I imagine must have been a different box, maybe greatest hits or something like that, says that it was instrumental in THQ having a 59% revenue increase. Now, in 1998, WCW got, I wouldn't say they got hotter, but I'd say wrestling as a whole was at its hottest. So having a re-release was very smart. I didn't even know they did a re-release. But the point that I wanted to visit here again is how instrumental WCW was in saving the THQ brand. THQ was a struggling brand, and the WCW titles and later the WWE titles are largely what kind of kept these guys floating for a long time. You almost wonder if THQ didn't have these wrestling titles, would they have been around as long as they were? It's an interesting thing to consider. You know, is there the possibility that without wrestling, THQ might have gone under way sooner? That's some research to do for another time. But let's get back into the reception. It says, the game received generally positive reviews. Praise was given particularly to the simple yet comprehensive gameplay approach and variety of fun multiplayer modes. IGN's Matt Casamassina. Ooh, I like that. Matt Casamassina. I like that name. Casamassina. Yeah. Went as far as to state, if you even moderately enjoy wrestling but love multiplayer gaming, we don't see how you could go wrong with this game. Its 3D polygonal engine, character animation, and dynamic camera movements were also considered refreshing to a genre that had not experienced such modern innovations. In IGN's 2008 History of Wrestling Games article, Russ McLaughlin reflected, World Tour was just as revolutionary as the nWo storyline it borrowed, with all the moves built off holds instead of happening out of nowhere. Suddenly, wrestling was all about the grapple again, and players loved it. Russ sees it the way I see it. Russ gets it. World Tour was just as revolutionary as the nWo storyline it borrowed. I said it at the top, and I'll say it again because it bears repeating. WCW nWo, or WCW versus nWo World Tour, was the ground level for all the other games that everybody always loves over this one. And it's funny because I asked the question on X, or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I said, what's a wrestling game that you love that everybody else hates? Call it engagement farming, but I was curious because I had played some crappy wrestling games recently, and the game that spawned that question was Backyard Wrestling. And I remember a lot of people love that game, and I was like, I don't get it. So one person who answered, my good buddy Johnny Primer, you catch him in the state of Maine doing some wrestling. So Johnny Primer tells me that the game that he loves that everybody hates is WCW versus nWo World Tour. And I got to tell you, I was shocked by this. I was shocked because maybe it's because of how I view those games. I see them as one and the same. Yes, each one has more than the previous. Revenge had more than World Tour. WrestleMania had more than Revenge. No Mercy had more than WrestleMania. You know, each one built on the other. But I was shocked to see my buddy Primer say that that was the game that he loves that everybody else doesn't love. And I was like, well, first of all, I love this game. When I was a teenager, this game came out in 1997, so I wasn't even officially a teenager yet. But this game was the source of a number of sleepovers with my best friend in childhood. His name was David. I used to sneak over to his grandmother's house after she went to work because she didn't want him having sleepovers because he technically wasn't supposed to be living there. So if he had extra people there, it drew attention to her. But, you know, dumbass kids that we were, she'd go to work at 10 p.m. I'd be sneaking in the hallway door at 10:30, hanging out till 5:30 in the morning, pissing off right before she got home from work. She'd be none the wiser that I was there. A couple of times she showed up early and caught us, but it's not like we were doing anything malicious. were literally sitting there either on the internet or playing the Nintendo 64 wrestling. But World Tour was one of those ones that we did countless overnights, just playing against each other, playing the modes. Playing against each other was one of the greatest and most frustrating experiences ever. David was a spammer. He loved the same moves again and again and again. So did I. He was a better spammer than I was. So that got very frustrating at various times. But as I've gotten older, I've also developed the viewpoint that people who complain about spamming are just mad that they can't develop the defense to block that move. Go ahead and come for me on the comments on that one. I don't really care. That's my viewpoint, and I'm sticking to it. If you're mad that somebody spams the same move again and again and again and again, you just suck at blocking that move. That's just my view, okay? That's it. But Primer saying that everybody around him hates World Tour makes me question the people around him, because this game is phenomenal. Even as IGN said, right? It was IGN here in my notes. Let's see, let's find it again. So yeah, even if you moderately enjoy wrestling but love multiplayer gaming, we don't see how you could go wrong with this game. You don't even have to like wrestling to enjoy this game. If you enjoy fighting games, you can enjoy this. If you enjoy party games of any kind, it's so simple to pick up. Yes, the Nintendo 64 controllers can be a little confusing, but hell, over the years, I've figured out how to map a Nintendo 64 game to a PlayStation controller. So, you know, it's not as bad as everybody likes to put off that it is. Yeah, those little yellow buttons are in a weird spot, I will admit. They're definitely in a weird place. But even if you take the yellow buttons out of the equation, okay, fine, you're not going to do any running, but you can still experience so much of the game even without knowing what to do with those little yellow buttons. It's a game that anybody could pick up. So I don't understand what the problem could be with this game. And, you know, people could point to things that are missing, and I can point that it was 1997. You know, oh, it doesn't have cage matches, ladder matches, table matches, championship belts. Hey, it had way more than most wrestling games had going for it at that point in time. In 1997, what was our best WWF offering? WrestleMania, the arcade game, and In Your House? And those weren't even set in the actual arenas. We had WCW versus the World. And we didn't even have WWF Warzone yet. Warzone was a 98 release. So considering the wrestling video game landscape in the United States at this point in time, I would understand even less how somebody could dump on World Tour. It was just shocking to me. Absolutely shocking to me. So, you know, maybe my buddy Primer's friends are GameSpot employees or something, where they're handing out 5.7s to this bad boy, because, you know, we'll get to it in my final review, but I find the 7 range to be very, very fair to this game. You know, it's limited in a lot of fronts, but it's also very deep in a lot of fronts. You know, each of those promotions we talked about before all have a league challenge, and there's a tag and a singles, and some of them have cruiserweights, and so you can do different modes to become a champion, even though you don't actually get a belt. It's still fun, and you know, I've talked about it before. This is on a personal level, but I always loved how international footage looked as a kid, because it's shot on a different format. What is it? The United States is NTSC, and then over internationally it's PAL, if I got that correct. But the way it's shot looks different, and this game captures a lot of that different feeling that I liked in the footage. Like when WCW would show stuff like, say, from the Tokyo Dome, it looked different than footage shot here in the United States. I even remember the WWF when they would shoot over in England or France or Germany. The footage looked like it had like a fade filter on it. I don't know. I don't know what the deal was with that, but it was an interesting look. And this game, it achieves a lot for its time. So basic as it may be, I think it appealed to anybody that liked multiplayer games. And for the roster itself, like, yeah, it's limited in its WCW guys, but I mean, for its time, I don't think we're missing a lot of major players. I mean, we got Luger, Sting, Giant, the Steiners, we got Ric Flair. We got our cruiserweights represented with Ultimo Dragon, Malenko, Eddie, Rey Mysterio. Steven Regal even makes the game. We got Chris Benoit, DDP makes it in. Glacier and Wrath make it in. You know, they were kind of bigger characters at the time because of, you know, they were kind of planned before the NWO made those types of characters a little passe, but all the same. And then we've got a bunch of the NWO. Hogan, Sting, Bagwell, Bischoff, Norton, Hall, Nash, Six, and Savage. So even the note that it lacks in actual WCW characters, I mean, yeah, there definitely could have been more. And we saw a lot more in Revenge, but I think it did all right. Yeah, I think it did all right. I think it did just fine. But, you know, sometimes it's easier to come up with your complaints than it is to come up with compliments. And I do that sometimes. I'm not going to sit here and act like a perfect. Like, I don't criticize before I can do something positive with something. But, you know, saying, oh, it's limited in how many characters it has. Yeah, but it had all the major players. I mean, yeah, sure, it would have been nice to have Alex Wright and Disco Inferno, for example. Sure, maybe. But it was also nice to get what we got. And each and every wrestling game always got bigger, better, and badder. You know, if they gave us everything right out of the chute, we wouldn't have loved everything that came after it. Everything's always building up to the ultimate climax. Especially in wrestling. You know, look at the history of wrestling games is almost like one long wrestling video or one long wrestling card. You know, we started off with WrestleMania and World Championship Wrestling on the Nintendo. And look at where we are now. You know, I got my gripes about WWE 2K series, but look at where the games have come to from there. So it's like a never-ending card, and you're building up. And someday I imagine the ultimate, like the WrestleMania main event of wrestling video games is a full-on VR experience where the characters that you wrestle are the actual people. Like, they're not video game anymore. It's literally you against Seth Rollins. And somehow through the power of VR technology that will evolve fast beyond my thinking years, you'll be able to wrestle Seth Rollins and he'll adapt. He'll be a video game avatar, but he won't be a video game avatar. It's crazy, man. It's all crazy. But before we get in to the final review, and before my vocal cords take a big old crap and start giving out on me here, I don't know what the deal is. I've been drinking water all day long, and I can't get ahead here. And if you've been hearing that all throughout, it's because I'm sorry that I keep horsing up here, but it's almost done. And if you haven't tuned out yet, I appreciate it. But let's get into the what was going on at the time in WCW. And then we can start wrapping things up with the review and talking about next week, and then we'll be good to go. All right. So let's see. This game came out, again, we already said it, November 30th, 1997, about, I think it was 28 days after the game came out. WCW presented Starrcade. Of course, this was the Starrcade in 97 with Hogan and Sting. It was Sting's first match in 18 months. Came back to a lot of acclaim, a lot of critical analysis because he wasn't in the normal shape. He wore this full bodysuit. He didn't appear to have been anywhere near a tanning salon, which is big in wrestling. And something, you know, at the time watching it, you never probably would have noticed it unless you were really, really a smart fan. And in 97, I wasn't a smart fan. I wasn't reading dirt sheets and that sort of stuff. So I didn't really notice anything off. But if you go back and watch it, things seem off about Sting. And everything seems off about the match. And ultimately, there was a weird attempt at a fast count that wasn't a fast count. And Bret Hart's going on and on and on about Montreal, and now it's not going to happen again. And eventually Sting walks away with the WCW Championship. Big pop from the crowd in DC, but then they vacate the belt like 8 days later. They hold it up. Sting gets it back at Super Brawl. Eric Bischoff has explained that this was done because Sting was going through some personal issues, and it wasn't the right time to put the belt on him, but they felt they had no other alternative but to put the belt on him because of the story. And so they came up with the whole convoluted thing to put controversy around it. And then apparently within 2 months by Super Brawl, everything was groovy again. But then I think for all the storytelling that we did with Sting and the Crow and all that stuff, I think his title reign lasted all of like 2 or 3 months. I think he lost it to the Macho Man Randy Savage. So very weird. And then before 1998 ends, before the summer ends, Sting is a member of the nWo. Granted, the nWo Wolfpack, but all the same, still a member of the nWo. What the fuck, man? Elsewhere in WCW, mentioned Bret Hart. Bret Hart played a referee at Starrcade. Coming in off of the most controversial moment in wrestling history, in my opinion, the Montreal Screwjob. Did we put Bret Hart into a big storyline with a major star who maybe says, hey, you deserved what Vince did to you, and nobody wants you here in WCW, so why'd you even bother coming here? Did we put him into an angle like that? Shit, no. We made him the referee for Eric Bischoff versus Larry Zbyszko, a decision that seems to be defended, but also not really defended. Could have done something way better with Bret Hart. Could have just held him off of Starrcade altogether, if that's what you were going to do with him. I would have had him come in hot. Coming off of Montreal, where he punched out Vince, broke a bunch of TV monitors, spelled out WCW in footage that aired on WWE TV. Vince with the whole, Bret screwed Bret deal. In fact, that episode of Raw is the topic of discussion on 83 Weeks this week. As I record this episode, that episode was late to drop. It wasn't available Monday morning. I usually start my Mondays with Click This with Kevin Nash, and then I go to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff, and that's my Monday for podcasts. So I haven't listened to it yet, but it's funny that I brought that up. But anyway, coming off the heels of all that, you could have done so much better business with Bret Hart. And, there's a lot of talk that Bret wasn't the same Bret Hart anymore after Montreal, and that he wasn't really willing to do business, blah, blah, bliggity, blah. But ultimately, I think WCW fumbled the bag on this one. Another note about WCW at the time that I thought was particularly interesting, December 1997, Goldberg was only 3 months in to his roster run here, and at Starrcade, as I write, even crazier, he's pretty much the heel in the story, and he's loosely aligned with Deborah McMichael. Goldberg wasn't really heel per se, but he associated with heels when he first joined. And his whole deal with Mongo is basically former football players. They got a problem with each other because they're former football players. So that's the problem that they have with each other. That's wrestling for you. If I recall at one point, I think Goldberg either stole or got Mongo's I think it was 86 Super Bowl ring as a payment from Deborah. Last note that I had here, for WCW said, notes, WCW is at its probably at its hottest in this period of time into 1998, but the tides would begin to turn just 30 days after the Starrcade event, as the WWE, WWF at the time, presented the Royal Rumble, and in a press box was the baddest man on the planet, Iron Mike Tyson. And Eric Bischoff has gone on the record as saying that was a moment that made him take note that the WWF was coming and they were going to come swinging to get their spot back. Because at this point in 1997, when this game came out, Starrcade, WWE is in the middle of a 83-week losing streak, which will not come to an end until April, when Vince McMahon and Steve Austin are scheduled for a main event. That is the night that WWE finally beats Nitro. And if I recall, I don't even think it was head-to-head. I think Nitro was preempted, or they started early, or something. Either way, the streak was over. But at this point, WCW still got another, let's see, when the game came out to Starrcade, we still got another 4 or 5 months of WCW routinely wiping the floor with the WWE. And I think that's another reason why I like these, the WCW games, because WWE won the battle. There's no more WCW. There's no more ECW. You know, even going further back, there's no AWA. Yeah, the NWA is still around, but they're whatever. There's no world-class championship wrestling. There's no championship wrestling from Florida. There's no Mid-South. There's no JCP. There's none of that anymore. A game like WCW World Tour and even Revenge, it takes you back to that era when wrestling was at its hottest. And yeah, wrestling is making the most money that it's ever made. But I wouldn't call it the hottest it's ever been. Things cost more. They charge more. They can get away with more. But I wouldn't call it the hottest it's ever been. I'd say this period of 97, 98, 99 for WWE and WCW respectively was the hottest period in wrestling history. But let's get into the final review here, because this episode has been going on for a little over an hour here. We even played the entire league challenge. So good times. So sorry you're staring at a thumbnail at this point, I assume. Based on my timing here, I think you're staring at a thumbnail by now of the logo. So let's go ahead and wrap it up so you're not staring at nothing for too long. So here's my final review of WCW versus nWo World Tour. Because WCW was so hot at the time, I was itching for any reason to play WCW games. WCW versus the World had come out earlier in the year on the PlayStation 1, and this game took what that game was and made it better, in my opinion. The Nintendo 64 era of video games for wrestling are unrivaled, and this game was the one that started it all domestically. This game would evolve into Revenge, which evolved into WrestleMania 2000, and finally evolved into No Mercy, one of the games cited as being the best wrestling game ever made. I have found in my travels that WCW versus nWo World Tour gets a lot of hate, and I can't see why. I can understand some of the gripes, but ultimately, for a game in 1997, this provided hours of entertainment, from the regular singles matches to the league challenge that rewarded you with unlockable characters for clearing the leagues and collecting the trophies. WCW vs. nWo World Tour absolutely deserves your love, and it's a cheap enough game to add to your collection. My final rating would be a 7.5 out of 10. So who did I agree with there? I agree with IGN. I think a 7.5 out of 10 is great. You'll never see me give a game a 10 out of 10. I don't know what the perfect game is, but you know what? Sure, we'll dock some points to the fact that there could have been more WCW guys. We didn't have to rely on these FMW and IWGP New Japan wrestlers, right? We could have filled it up with some more WCW guys. We could have done more WCW-based arenas We could have had Saturday night, or we could have had Nitro, we could have had Pro or Main Event or whatever. Clash of Champions. Could have done a little bit more with that, so we dock those points for that detail. But those things will come. So 7.5, absolutely fair in my opinion. I agree with it on that one. And like I said, it's the base for all the games that everybody loves. So if you love No Mercy and you love WrestleMania and you love Revenge, but you hate this game, well, you hate the one that started the road. Because I don't get it. And if you love the game, throw it in the comments, man. Show some love for this one, because this one deserves it. I had a great time recording it on YouTube. The 5-on-5 WCW versus nWo battle will be posted as well, because it wasn't able to be used in this episode. But I had a lot of fun with it. I always have a lot of fun with it. Like I said, the Nintendo 64 THQ era of wrestling games is unrivaled. Because we can't say all of the N64 era, because we did have Warzone, Attitude, Nitro, Mayhem, the ECW Hardcore Revolution game, Backstage Assault. Those all got released on the 64, and for the most part, the gameplay on those already sucked enough on the PlayStation. Sucked even harder on the Nintendo 64. But on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. And while we're talking about things that sucked on the Nintendo, things that sucked on the Nintendo 64, there we go. We'll keep that gaff in there. I leave the bloopers in. But while we talk about things that sucked on the Nintendo 64, next week on the show, we're going to talk about something that didn't suck. In fact, it's my second favorite game mode of the wrestling game history. We're going to talk about WWE 13, and we're going to spend a lot of time on the Attitude Era mode, the Universe mode, and all the different modes of that game. A lot of great memories with WWE 13, and going to the midnight premiere, and collector's editions, and t-shirts, and all that fun stuff. And we'll talk about it next week here on the show, next Wednesday, 6 a.m. Eastern, YouTube and Spotify. But on that note, my friends, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Go ahead and give these vocal cords a little bit of a rest, because I don't know what my problem is, but we keep getting a little horsey. And I'm sure that's not a whole bunch of fun to listen to at various times. I'm sure I'm already tough enough to listen to without my voice being super hoarse. But as always, if you'd like to follow me on social media, you can do so at Bloody Bill Vox, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube. There's some other ones there, but as I always like to tell you, wherever you may be, whatever platform you may be on, you want to know if I'm there, just put in Bloody Bill Vox. If you see me there, I'm there. But if you don't see me there, chances are I'm never going to be there. But you never know. Always keep a lookout for your favorite neighborhood podcasting wrestling freak weirdo. Yeah, that's right. But until next week when we talk about WWE 13, have fun out there, stay safe out there, and be happy out there. Because, life's short. And there's already enough suckage. Be as happy as you can be. We'll see you next week, right here. Dropkicks and Joysticks.